Good morning, everyone. If I may have your attention, please, we're about to start. Good morning, and welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Marissa Khurma, and I head the Middle East Special Initiatives here at the center. Our panel for today is a very important topic, but also a very timely topic, given that today is May 1st and it's International Labor Day. So happy May Day to those who celebrate. I know it's not celebrated here in the US, but so we're here with a very distinguished panel to talk about the workforce challenge facing youth in the Middle East and North Africa region. Most recently, we've seen a wave of protests in the past year, in particular in Jordan, in Iraq, Sudan, Algeria, and just a few days ago in Tunisia as well. And while the economic challenges are not the only reason people are out on the streets, it is certainly a trigger for many youth in particular who represent the majority of the population in the region. Vast majority of them are jobless, and many highly educated who are unable to find jobs. And so for those of us who are from the Middle East or who are working in the Middle East or on the Middle East, we know what the set of common challenges are across the region when it comes to youth and the workforce. First of all, the youth unemployment rate is amongst the highest, at 26% according to the World Bank. There are challenges in creating jobs on the demand side, outdated education models, a skills mismatch, and we cannot forget the impact of regional conflict on the economy and how it affects workforce development in general. So today, we don't want to only focus on the challenges, but we have a panel of experts who have been working in the field and here in Washington for many years in the region, who can tell us a little bit more about their strategic approach to workforce development. So let's shift to talk about some of the solutions and possible interventions so that we can better address this challenge in the future. And I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'll start. To my left is Greg Simpson, who's the Mena Regional Director for the Center of International Private Enterprise. Denise Lamotte, Senior Economic Officer from AID's Middle East Bureau. Mara Cronenfeld, the Mena Regional Director from the International Youth Foundation. And Andrew Baird, President and CEO of the Education for Employment. So thank you very much and welcome. Denise, I'm going to start with you. Particularly because of AID's extensive work in the region in economic development, but most specifically in workforce development. So tell us a little bit more about your strategic approach and your strategic vision in addressing the workforce challenge, particularly with youth.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you very much for having USAID here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I too echo Happy May Day. Let me begin by saying the following. I have some opening remarks because I'd like to tell you a little bit about how USAID responds to what we call better employment outcomes broadly. Recently, the World Economic Forum released the Middle East and North Africa Risk Landscape after polling policymakers and members of the private sector and the NGO community about global risk. It found, WEF found, the top economic and governance risks to the MENA region were 1, energy price shocks, and 2, unemployment. Behind, terrorist attacks in third place. Thus, our topic today, workforce development and youth employment, and may I add, female employment, is timely. Regarding women, in the MENA region, only 16% of working-age women are employed, compared to 46% globally. 84% of women in the MENA region are outside the labor force or participate in the informal economy. Marissa, to your question, what are USAID's strategic vision and strategic approach to better employment outcomes in the MENA region? USAID has the highest priorities are, at this time, the journey to self-reliance. I don't know if you've heard of it, but we oftentimes refer to it as J2SR. And what is the journey to self-reliance? Since it is one of our highest priorities, namely, it is supporting our partner countries on the journey to self-reliance to eventually solve their own development challenges without foreign assistance. Our second highest priority is private sector engagement, inclusive private sector-led development. So those are our two highest priorities at USAID. Now let's talk a little bit about our key approaches, which we called, which we deem, which we embrace is demand-driven private sector job creation, which I tend to divide into three buckets. Bucket number one is our top-down, bottom-up approach. Top-down is government technical assistance to address better employment outcomes in the region. Bottom-up is working with the private sector, businesses, business organizations, and associations to do the same thing, create private sector-led job creation. Bucket number two, which is tied to bucket number one, are the ABCs. Our approach with regard to addressing employment is one, to assist SMEs with access to finance. That's your A. The B is the business enabling environment. We know in the region we need better policies, reforms, and good governance. So that's what we call in USAID speak, BEE, the business enabling environment. And the C in bucket number two is capacity building. We seek to build the capacity for the governments in the region and the private sector to do what they need to do to serve the residents and citizens of their countries. Then we get to bucket number three, and they're all tied, and that's workforce development. Workforce development for us is demand-driven training and skills building to meet employers' staffing needs today and tomorrow. Now let's focus on youth employment for the moment. Youth unemployment rates in the MENA region, as you have indicated, Marissa, is the highest in the world for the last 25 years, reaching 30% in 2017. MENA youth often search for years before finding work. The world average youth unemployment rate is, guess what? 13%. However, in Palestine, it is 43%. In Jordan, it is 36%. And in Tunisia, it is also 36%. And there is Iraq, where I've been twice this year so far. It is 17.6%. Now to the countries that we were asked to speak to specifically, Morocco, Tunisia, and Jordan. Morocco's youth. Morocco's youth represent over half of that country's total population and are twice as likely to be unemployed compared to the national average. Over 20% of graduates are unable to find jobs relevant to their education and training, while employers lament that they cannot find candidates with the right skills, and I like to say at the right time for the particular employer. So their employers are saying that the Moroccan graduates do not have the appropriate work readiness skills. An interesting fact, 300,000 new entrants enter the Moroccan job market annually, 300,000. Thus, job creation is a top national policy priority for Morocco. How do we create jobs? Oftentimes in the MENA region, a lot of times in the MENA region, it tends to be the small and medium enterprises. And in Morocco, the small and medium enterprises count for 95% of all Moroccan companies, 95%, and about half of the country's employment. Now, USAID. USAID, Morocco's Middle East North Africa Investment Initiative, which we often refer to as Mena II, it's a project that provides access to finance and business technical support to small and medium enterprise. We also have a Career Center program that increases access to employability services for university and vocational school students and recent grads. Moving on to Tunisia. USAID's economic growth programs support the private sector to create more jobs. Here in in Tunisia, we have a keen focus on firm-level assistance. And we have a focus on not just firm-level assistance, but those firms that are more likely than not to create jobs. We also have another program in Tunisia. It's called the Tunisia Jobs Opportunity and Business Success Project, better known as Tunisia Jobs. It's a 5-year activity since 2018, and it too is to assist small and medium enterprises expand their businesses and create thousands of new jobs. Another program that I've managed for the last couple of years is the Center for Entrepreneurship and Executive Development, better known as CEED, C-E-E-D. And that particular program provides business mentoring, marketing, and management training to Tunisian entrepreneurs. We have another program in Tunisia. It's called Mashuri. It's a partnership with Hewlett-Packard, UNIDO, and the Italian government to foster entrepreneurship and job training among at-risk youth in the interior parts of Tunisia, where unemployment is the highest. We also have the Tunisia American Enterprise Fund, which promotes private sector development and access for businesses. Moving on to Jordan. USAID Jordan also embraces a market-driven approach and works with the government of Jordan to do a couple of things: to foster a better business enabling environment, that's the BEE, to encourage business growth across key sectors with high potential, such as tourism and information communications technology, and to increase finance for business to expand job opportunities and accelerate the kingdom's economic growth. In Jordan, less than 1/5 of women participate in the workforce. In Jordan, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises employ 70% of Jordan's private sector workforce. As such, we know that SMEs in Jordan are vital to the kingdom's economic stability and prosperity. USAID has several programs in Jordan as well. The USAID Training for Employment Activity, TEA or T, trains Jordanians and Syrians to gain skills that meet the economy's demands. USAID supported business development services have expanded work opportunities for thousands of people in Jordan and yielded over $1 billion in new investments in Jordan since 2006. We also have helped the country of Jordan with the Jordan-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and that particular agreement resulted in increasing from $568 million in 2001, trade between Jordan and the U.S., to almost $3 billion in 2018. Now, for me, I have to talk about Iraq since I've spent a lot of time there, and I've been there twice this year, and we'll be back again this year, just to let you know. Iraq has one of the youngest populations in the world. The Iraqis under age 24 account for 59% of its population. USAID is also working to improve employment outcomes in Iraq. We have the USAID Economic Reform Project that addresses strengthening the business enabling environment, BEE, to promote business growth and private sector job creation. And we have the Iraq Mena II, which I manage from Iraq, here from Washington, It's also an access to finance project that focuses on job creation. Bottom line, why does youth employment in the MENA region matter to U.S. policy? That was one of your questions, right, Marissa? Mm-hmm. Why? The goal regarding supporting youth employment and inclusive economic growth from a demand-driven private sector job creation approach is simple, but huge. It is in pursuit of political, economic, and social stability in the MENA region. The converse, unemployed youth undermine a stable MENA region. Unemployed youth undermine a stable MENA region. Thus, expanding businesses that create jobs and provide households with reliable incomes contribute greatly to a country's self-reliance. Combined, these key ingredients contribute to increased economic productivity, check. Expanded employment, check. And longer-term growth and stability for the MENA region, check, check. Without question, the road to better employment outcomes for the MENA region, its youth and its women, is a steep climb. But it is one that USAID is greatly committed to and will continue to address. Your thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denise. You gave us a lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. You mentioned that your approach is very much demand-driven. So I thought I'll turn to you, Greg, and ask you to talk a little bit more about the work that the Center for International Private Enterprise does, because your interventions are more on the demand side. What, from your experience, has worked, and why is it important to focus on the demand side?
Thank you very much, Marissa. It's great to be here today. We appreciate you having SIPE here at on the panel. SIPE, for those of you who aren't as familiar with us, has two parents, if you will. One is the National Endowment for Democracy. We're one of the four core institutes of the NED, along with the two-party institutes and labor. And the other is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the world's largest independent business federation, with representing over 3 million businesses. So, as such, you put those two together, and we are focused primarily on engaging with the private sector in the countries where we work to help them engage and solve some of these problems that we're mentioning, particularly in the policy process. So we work with chambers of commerce, we work with business associations, we work with think tanks, and empower them to engage in problem solving on some of these issues. And we think that their engagement in policy and that dialogue is very important for solving not only some of the immediate needs when it comes to employment and job creation, but longer term looking at some of the structural needs, which we think are equally, if not more important. There's a temptation to think in terms of a lack of resources when we look at some of these issues. A temptation to think, well, if we just put more money, if we just put more investment, if we just put more training. But the truth is that there are structural issues that are going to mean that even the additional money, the additional investment, the additional training is not going to have the impact that we're seeking. And just to put it in perspective a little bit, Denise mentioned that SMEs are the engine of job creation in MENA, and that's true, and need to be more an engine for job creation. But in fact, SMEs are the engine of job creation everywhere. Looking at the U.S. economy, small business is responsible for 2/3 of job creation in the U.S. economy. And between not just small firms, but new firms, between 1980 and 2005, firms less than 5 years old were responsible for nearly all net job creation in the United States. It's become fashionable to look at entrepreneurship in emerging markets, and sometimes that comes under criticism because, of course, well, not everyone who doesn't have a job is going to become an entrepreneur, and that's true. But that's not the reason to focus on entrepreneurship. In point of fact, it's the entrepreneurial dynamism and the flexibility of an economy and the ability of an economy to absorb new entrants, new ideas, new innovations, and weed out old inefficiencies and stagnant firms that drives growth and drives job creation. And so, and the Middle East and North Africa faces some fairly significant structural problems in that respect. A lot of that is a legacy of command economies and the transition to command economy, and a lot that's left over on the books, whether it be legal and regulatory or even habit and custom. The public sector, for example, remains in many countries in the MENA region the largest employer, between 14 and 40% of employment. On average, public sector wages occupy 9% of GDP, which is the highest in the world. This has a depressing effect on growth and on job creation. And so looking at some of those structural issues is going to be an important element of solving some of the issues we see. And as well, I think that dialogue also then extends in the skills realm, for example, because yes, there's a skills gap, but at the same time, you don't see governments and private sector engaged in a conversation as to what exactly those skills are. And meanwhile, where the conventional wisdom has it that unemployment is high because the economy is suffering, because jobs need to be created, you have a situation in, for example, Tunisia, where one of our partner organizations conducted a survey of employers. There's an estimated 107,000 job openings in Tunisia for 2019, many of which they're expecting to remain unfilled. And shockingly, for example, in the construction industry, employers reported that it can take nearly 5 years to fill unskilled labor positions in the construction industry in Tunisia. It can take close to that amount of time to fill positions, for example, in catering. And that was a number that was just staggering to me. Yeah. At the same time, in Jordan, for example, in the restaurant industry, our partners reported 70% of labor is foreign labor, where at the same time you have Jordanians who are seeking jobs. And of course, the temptation there from a government perspective would be to simply clamp down on foreign labor, but then the skills gap would remain, and so you'd wind up with a situation where you'd just exacerbate the labor shortages. So these are some of the issues that we're looking at, some of the issues that our partners are looking at. Most of our partners are in the small and medium enterprise sector. Not all of them, but most of them are associations and chambers representing that sector, because that's where you get the most benefit of collective action when it comes to policy engagement. And so in places like Jordan, where one of our partners a number of years ago reduced the capital requirement that the law required to start an LLC, for example. Or Egypt, where recently a group of small and medium enterprises in one of Egypt's poorest governorates, Sohag, released this small and this Sohag business agenda outlining the things that they would need to grow. And generally speaking, access to finance, while it's in here, is not top of the list. It's more things like government fulfilling its commitments on infrastructure and that kind of thing, as well as, again, the skills gap and some other issues like that. When it comes to access to finance, it's not we need foreign investment or even or government investment. It's we need the banking sector to be modernized and liberalized so that lending flows the way it ought to. And we hear that from a lot of our partners as well. And I have some other examples, but I'll leave some time for the other panelists.
Thank you. You mentioned the skills gap multiple times, because that's a real challenge. So I'm going to turn to Andrew, because the work of Education for Employment directly addresses the skills gap with the programs and you're present in 9 countries in the region, if I'm
right.
Yeah. So it would be great to hear a little bit more about the interventions, what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Great.
Yeah.
So I think both Denise and Greg have laid out the situation there, and that's the backdrop against which Education for Employment was formed. And in the founder's words, he started with the belief that talent is universal, but opportunities are not. And so how does one bridge that gap that we're hearing here about the needs of the employers and the skill sets of the youth? So that was what EFE was intended to address in the Mena region when it was founded about 14 years ago now. So as was said, we operate in 9 countries in the region at the moment. Our model is kind of an end-to-end model, and we see 2 clients. We see one as the private sector as a very important model, or a very important client. We have 3,000 employer partners around the region that we connect with to understand their employment needs. And our focus has been on unemployed youth searching for their first job. And the initial target was university graduates, because amongst all of this, the highest demographic of unemployed youth were university graduates, more so than high school leavers, more so than any other group of youth. Approaching, in some countries, more than 80% unemployment rate 2 years out of university. So that was the initial target. We've since moved back from that and work with technical vocational graduates as well as high school graduates. But it is the focus on the first job, and that's partly due to the belief in the research that shows the importance of that foot in the door and getting that first job, and what your life and career trajectory is once you have achieved that. So once we understand the needs of a particular private sector partner that we have in their employment, we form classes. We recruit youth into the classes based on interest and some basic set of skills. And our focus has been on primarily the soft skills, or I'm trying to change the lexicon away from soft skills to essential skills.
Essential skills, yes.
Yes. And I believe these are a lot of the essential skills, and I think a lot of the folks up here have heard the same thing when speaking with employers, that this is one of the most significant missing elements that they're finding in the youth that they're recruiting for positions, is that work readiness mentality and those skills. So that's been the focus. We also provide some degree of technical training and English training based on the needs of the industry. What has worked? Our model has been to create local affiliates in each of the countries. So EFE has registered entities in each country that we're operating in with their own board, and the boards are primarily private sector. They're really the who's who in the business community in many cases. They're great door openers. They're people who we count on to reach out and build this network of employer partners. And I think that has been one of the critical elements to the success of EFE's model. We are now on course. This year we will have connected our 100,000th youth to the world of work, which we're proud of, but we also recognize it's a drop in the bucket. And illustrative of that, I think Denise mentioned Palestine and the Palestinian territories. I met recently with the Minister of Labor there, and we were talking about our program, and he was asking about our results recently, and we had placed just over 12,000 youth in jobs in the territories over the last 7 or 8 years. And he was saying, wonderful, we love the work that you do. But he said, this is my problem. I have 40,000 people entering the workforce every year. The government can absorb about 2,000 to 3,000 of those at best. The private sector is absorbing 6,000 to 7,000. So that leaves me with more than 30,000 year on year that are unemployed. And so that number that was presented of 40% is simply growing. And it doesn't take much to extrapolate what probably the net result of that will be in the long run. And that's a story that's being repeated everywhere. This is a change. I think one of the positive things that I'm seeing is 10 years ago, this was on some people's radar. It wasn't on many people's radar. This is now one of the first things that comes out of the lips of most people at senior government levels when I'm speaking with them, is the challenge of employment and particularly youth unemployment. Andre Azoulay in Morocco is the advisor to the king. He's an advisor to the last two kings. I had lunch with him recently, and I said, where does this rank in Morocco's priorities? He looked at me and he said, this is the only thing that matters right now. He said, if we don't get this right, nothing else we do will matter. And that was pretty strong affirmation of I think the place that they're and the emphasis that they're putting on this. So I think that's a positive in that I do believe I'm seeing more resources, more attention being paid to this. Ultimately, EFE fills a role that we shouldn't need to fill. We're kind of exercising this labor market intermediation function, matching this demand. The Tunisia study is one that got a lot of attention in Tunisia, the 107,000, 108,000 jobs that are unfilled. And again, that repeats everywhere. Yet you have side by side this high unemployment, so bridging that gap. And so our kind of dual track that we work on is systems change. And we believe that the focus really has to be on the educational system. And so Morocco, I think, is where we've made the greatest strides in doing that. Over the last year and a half, we've embedded EFE's training programs in 360 secondary schools in Morocco, and that's expanding. Denise mentioned the Career Center program. We've been working on that program with USAID to work with career centers at universities as well. So building this function into the educational system is a strategy that we're working hard to promote. And I'll just close with a couple of other thoughts. I think one of the biggest challenges that we'll continue to face is not just that first job, which is an enormous challenge, but keeping skills relevant over time. And the pace of change, as we all know, is accelerating. And I was at the World Economic Forum meeting, the regional one in Jordan, as I think several people here were as well. And one of the themes was talking about that accelerated pace of change and the shelf life of education in many areas being 5 years or less. And so how do you develop the systems where people will continually get the kinds of skills and education that they need to remain relevant in the sectors that they're working in? So I think that's another challenge that needs a lot of attention. So that's our model, and I'm happy to answer questions about it later.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, this is a challenge that we need to focus on. We've been talking to officials here in Washington, and the first question about their readiness for any disruptions in the future is, well, we have the urgency of now is that we have the unemployment challenge today. So they're not even thinking about how some of these skills are going to be outdated. But you mentioned essential skills. And I know that the International Youth Foundation focuses a lot on work readiness, particularly on essential skills, as well as social innovation and entrepreneurship. So Mara, would like you to give us a glimpse of the work that you've been doing in the region.
Sure. I would be very happy to, and I'm very happy to be here and to speak with all of you and learn from my colleagues here as well as you in the room during this session. Before I get into some of the work we do, I just want to be a little bit controversial, and some of this was teased out already, but just to put a finer point on it, I'm going to try to bust 3 myths. We talk about Middle East and youth employability a lot, and we often quote the stark numbers. But let's try to dig in a little bit, and these are some things we've been thinking about at IOIF and in the region generally. One is, we tend to talk about the youth unemployment as primarily one about a misalignment between education and employment. And no doubt that is true, and no doubt that's a lot of what the work we do as well as EFE does. IOIF does a lot of work in that area, and not to undermine its importance. But it's not primarily that, as our colleague said from SIPE, as Greg said, that the number one need in the region is job creation. There just simply aren't enough jobs to employ the huge numbers of entrants every year into the job market. Jordan alone, we need 57,000 jobs to employ everybody who needs a job. And I would say one of the things we've been thinking about at IYF is perhaps an even more important misalignment, or one that's maybe talked about less, is the gap between the expectations of young people today and the reality of what's in front of them. At the International Youth Foundation, we engaged in a global youth well-being index, and happy to share this with any of you who are interested. It was across 30 countries, looking at youth well-being across 7 domains, including gender equity, health and safety, education, economic engagement. And we also, as part of that index, did a millennial viewpoint survey of samples of young people across these 30 countries, 4 of which were in the Mena region. And we found that youth in the index countries, by and large, are very optimistic about their economic futures. But actually, this domain, economic opportunity, is the area in which youth well-being scored worst. Okay, 74% of youth surveyed across these 30 countries in this study feel that they will be able to get the kind of job they want, and 65% of those young people feel they'll be able to make as much money as they want. This is in stark reality to what's out there. And when you interview people, young people, about the kind of jobs they want, we've all heard this, they want jobs in media, they want jobs in technology, they want jobs in the shrinking public sector. But where are the jobs? The jobs are in hospitality and tourism. We know that that's one of the largest markets for new entrants to the labor market in the coming years. The jobs are in agricultural, less of a sexy occupation for many of these young people. The jobs are in the service and retail industry. So how do we readjust those expectations? And we at IOIF feel a core part of our work is to harness the optimism of youth for their futures to productively integrate youth into the economy. But how do we shift their thinking, and how do we help governments understand, like the government clearly in Morocco understands, what a pressing issue this is, and that they need to address it? So another myth, I would say, is that that the interventions that we want to look at are primarily on the supply side. Now, yes, and I don't mean to undermine it again, because yes, so much of the work we do is on the supply side, and it's extremely important. But we also don't want to undercut the demand side interventions, and certainly Greg had spoken about those, and of course our Usaid colleague as well spoke about all the work Usaid is doing across these important countries on the private sector side. So what do those look like beyond business development, new business creation, creating new jobs? It's also about, I would say, preparing, I take Jordan, for example. We've done a lot of work. The HR sector in Jordan, HR individuals, don't yet have the capacity, the expertise to be able to adequately anticipate those needs in their sector and then signal those in time to the education and training sectors to change the kind of training that's done to be able to produce those graduates with the skills they need. So there's been discussions and thinking about how do we strengthen the capacity of the HR sector, for example, in the small and medium businesses that make up Jordan Chamber of Industry in the manufacturing sector in Jordan. So looking at strengthening HR capacity. But also, there's an issue of compliance in all of these countries, and particularly I'm thinking of Jordan and Morocco, where we've done a lot of work recently. But how do we make sure that the jobs that young people are getting are quality jobs, that they're formalized, that young people are getting Social Security, getting health insurance, that their working hours are reasonable, that the working conditions are youth-friendly, that young people have a reason to go to work, they're interested in it, they have mentorship, and that a caring adult is there to provide, to help them in positive youth development as well. Finally, another myth that we want to look at deeply, and I don't think nobody in this room is saying this just to reinforce, but it's one out there in the general ethosphere, is that somehow there may be something immutable or kind of integral about the Middle East and North Africa region and women's employability. And that there's something that kind of connects and oh yeah, of course women's employability is lower there. I want to be here to say, and I know many of you, that this is not a fundamental cultural or immutable aspect of the region, and that when the conditions are right, and ILO has a lot of work to show this, as well as better work Jordan and other settings in Morocco, there's also much better statistics in terms of women's employability in Morocco in general, and in Tunisia. But let's say in Jordan, when the conditions are right, when there's transportation to the job, when women have access to child care where they can place their children, when women feel safe on the job, when those people who they work with are trained in anti-sexual harassment training, when women are adequately trained for the job they're going to do, when those conditions are right, women do take jobs. And we've seen that among the Jordanians, and we've seen that among Syrians in Jordan who are Syrian refugees in Jordan right now. So those are just some things to think about, to push the envelope a little, encourage us to always think ahead. And I would say that IYF has been engaged across all of these areas. We have a really strong focus on youth and gender inclusion in what we do. And as I mentioned, and also as Marissa mentioned, a key aspect of our work is looking at how do we prepare young people for the workforce, is still on the supply side. And part of that is adequately preparing young men and young women to enter the workforce and interact with each other. So our life skills program, Passport to Success, which has now been used in 40 countries, it's in over 20 languages, hundreds of thousands of young people have gone through this program. We now have a genderized version of this to help young men and young women better navigate work and understand the obstacles that a young man or young woman might face in the work setting. And then also, we, as Andrew said, a key part of what we do is about systems as well. We can't get to scale, we can't achieve sustainable change unless we're engaging those education and training systems that are gonna improve the lives of young people at scale and for the future. And so Morocco is a place where we've been able to achieve some systems work, also through integration of effective life skills training into the primary school, middle school, and high schools in several regions in Morocco, and actually making sure that life skills are an integral part of academic training. And we've seen results which have reduced dropouts, school delinquency, and also improved grade point average through that integration. Lots more to talk about, but that's just the start.
Yeah, and to your point about female labor participation, because I know Denise mentioned this and emphasized that in the beginning, yes, the rates are very low across the region, and unfortunately the region ranks the lowest in the world in the World Economic Forum Gender Gap Index. But there are real barriers, and one of them that keeps coming up is the one on social norms or just perspectives, perceptions about women working. So we will be delving into that next month in another panel, because the World Bank has actually dissected, well, what does it mean to say, well, it's social norms? Because it's not, as you said, just cultural, because we see women, more women graduating tertiary education than men in many countries across the region. So there is reason for hope. And speaking of hope, I want to turn to Denise once again, particularly for the link you made with the importance of addressing this issue and also getting it right for the stability of the region and linking it back to U.S. Strategic interests in the region. I want to know a little bit more about how AID measures success, because this challenge has continued for many, many years, and there have been successes across different countries. But how can, I know that there's also a new emphasis on monitoring and evaluation at AID, but what have we learned so far from the projects that have been ongoing for many years, and how can we further improve and address some of the key challenges that our panelists talked about?
That's a tough question. How do we measure success? I think the correct answer is, how do we get results faster?
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things I think we have all acknowledged is job creation is very important, not only in the MENA region, but also in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And youth unemployment, some would say, is an accident waiting to happen. So this is the 21st century, so it absolutely baffles me, with all the brain power and resources in the world, why we collectively have not done a better job of addressing this issue of employment. And I'll put aside decent employment, and I'll put aside female employment. Let's just talk about how do we get more jobs, period. Now, I think there has been a reluctance in the donor community to embrace what does it really take to get a new job. And the answer that we are consistently coming up with, whether we want to accept it or not, is profit. Few companies, whether they are small, medium, or large, will take on a new employee if it does not have profit or the prospect of having profit. So in USAID's focus on private sector engagement, that's one of the things that we are going to stress more. Not just small and medium enterprise, but also linking the larger firms to the small and medium enterprises. What is it going to take, one, so that these particular entities become profitable, that they grow, that they want to take on and will take on new employees? Because one of the things we have also learned is that there's very little on-the-job training in these companies in the MENA region. So, but if you are a company that's making money and growing, more likely than not, at some point you are going to say, bring us the person who is willing and committed, then we will train the person. So in terms of how do we monitor and evaluate what we're doing, I think we need to really think about an explosion of new entrepreneurs coming on the scene, yes, with failure, but out any attempts, we won't get these new entrepreneurs that are growing and creating jobs. So I'll stop there. I don't know if I really answered your question.
I mean, you pointed to a number of important issues with regards to, I guess, corporate governance. And I know that, Greg mentioned it, and Andrew and Mara as well, how to work with the private sector to also improve their HR policies, to encourage mentorship programs, internship programs, on-the-job training, et cetera. Greg, what are your thoughts on this particular aspect of it, given the work that you've done through your local affiliates as well in the region?
Well, thanks for asking. And actually, here again, I think I would like to add a little bit of perspective from our own economy, because the Chamber had done some research in this area, and 96% of chief academic officers in the U.S. believe that they are effectively preparing students for work. 11% of business leaders strongly agree. Okay, so this skills gap is not unique to the MENA region.
Yep.
As many as 5 million jobs, 50% of open positions here in the U.S. go unfilled because employers can't find the right talent. And what And what the chamber's doing about it on this end, and I got a chance to speak to this at the Tunisian Enterprise Days late last year, is linking talent to, and need to talent in real time, using what they're calling talent pipeline management. And we don't have anything quite that sophisticated that we're working with in the MENA region, but I think it's a good example of how more structured dialogue can help address some of these issues. And this is where we work with some of our partners. I wanted to address one of the issues that was raised about compliance. Informality was raised as a compliance issue, and when it comes to informal labor, there's a compliance aspect to it, but there's more to it than that. Particularly in the case of, for example, inflexible labor laws, our partners in Egypt reported that companies often will have employees sign an undated resignation letter upon hiring, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to let them go in the case of an economic contraction. And if you're not
An
able to
interesting strategy.
Yeah, very creative.
Do I have a contract at all?
if you're not able to let someone go, then you're not going to hire when you have the opportunity, or at least you're not going to hire formally,
Right.
because you cannot guard against the future shocks. And the same is true when it comes to wages. The economic uncertainty leads to lower wages in the private sector, lower commitments on the part of the private sector, frankly, to investing in employees. And I think that this is a real issue. The other thing I wanted to say about informality is that when you look at informality writ large, it's a huge issue in the MENA region, and it's symptomatic. It's symptomatic of some of the structural problems that I was talking about. The MENA economies have informal sectors ranging between 17 and 46% of the economy. And I think the 17 is underreported. If you compare again to advanced economies like the US, it's more like 9%. And so the fact that you have all of this economic activity going on, but simply not in the formal economy, it's not an issue of people simply not wanting to comply with the law. It's an issue of the formal economy not being structured such that people can easily enter and exit. The same thing, by the way, with the backdated resignation letter. You also had in Egypt, before there was a bankruptcy regime, banks that would make people taking out loans sign undated checks as a guarantee against the loan, because then if they didn't make their loan payment, the bank would cash one of these undated checks, and the debtor would go to jail, because Egypt until recently still had debtor's prison. Right. So these are the kinds of structural imbalances that really, I mean, yes, they lead to compliance issues, but the compliance issues are driven primarily by need.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at one of the more famous would-be entrepreneurs in the region, Mohamed Bouazizi, there was research done about what it would have taken for him to have registered as a sole proprietor. He would have had to undergo 55 administrative steps that took 142 days, and not like 142 days of waiting for the mail, but 142 days of standing in line and filling out paperwork and such. And it would have cost him $3,200 in fees, which for him was a year's income. And so can one say that him doing business without proper licensing is a compliance issue? Well, yes, but I think there's more to it than that. And then at the same time, though, you look at this as an opportunity. One of the more amazing stories of the last few years in MENA didn't really get reported at all. But when Sisi went to build the new Suez Canal, he, as you may remember, put out a patriotic call for Egyptians to contribute, right? And so they did, to many people's surprise. And in 8 days, Egyptians invested $9 billion in the new Suez Canal project. 82% of that came from individuals in a country where only 10% of Egyptians have a bank account. $3.8 billion was introduced into the banking system in 8 days.
Wow.
This was money that came out from under people's mattresses.
Wow. Wow.
Why is that money not going, getting put to work? Why are people not investing that money? It's because these climates are not investment worthy.
Yeah, and we've seen basically even before the financial crisis, just the FDI levels constantly decrease, and even if they increase slightly, any regional turbulence affects perceptions and it affects FDI flows into the region.
Well, and we encourage our partners and the governments that we engage with to look at domestic investment before FDI, because if your domestic investors are not investing, then neither will
foreign
FDI
investors
come.
won't come in.
We and so this is what some of the things that we try to address with our work. We supported a group in Egypt that works with that represents about 30,000 small businesses, and they were successful in helping get through a new industrial licensing law in 2017, which is a great law. Unfortunately, and so it streamlined the licensing procedure so that it was sort of a one-stop shop type of thing. Unfortunately, all the old government entities that used to have a piece of industrial licensing are still coming and knocking at the doors of the SMEs, asking for their inspection or what have you. And so now we're supporting this organization to look at the implementation gap and see why what's written in law is not being implemented in fact. And again, this is exemplary of many of the structural problems that we see.
Yeah. And Andrea, I want to turn to you because you mentioned that you have private sector partners and more than 1,000 companies. So why are these interventions successful with these particular companies? I mean, I'm sure you started a dialogue, but why did they get it?
Yeah, well, it certainly has been a process to get to the number of partners that we have, but as I said, we kind of see two clients, and we really take seriously that, and I hesitate to use this word, but I'll use it in this group, the product that we produce, the youth skills and capacity matches very closely with what the employer is looking for. And so we've been able to demonstrate in several studies now that the youth entering the jobs with our partners stay longer, up to 3 times. And so that's an enormous cost for businesses, is that turnover, and are promoted more quickly within. So, ideally, our metric that we use to measure success, just to answer that question, and it's on a very small scale, what we do, is how many jobs are placed in youth, not how many people go through our programs.
Right.
We don't care that. And so we have about an 86% placement rate of the youth that go through our program. 56% of those are women. And we think that, or what we've seen is that once they've had an experience or two with us providing youth, they come back to us. That's the ideal, rather than our having to reach out. But ultimately, it is about creating the jobs.
Yeah.
And I echo what has been said here. I will say a couple of things about that, though, and one is that one of the factors of attracting investment, whether it's local or foreign investment, is the labor force. And is there a labor force that's ready for a particular sector?
Yeah.
And so I've been following, sure many of you have, what Morocco has been doing in the automotive industry. A really good example of taking a decision that this is a sector we're going after, we're going to provide the facilities, we're going to provide the youth or the workforce for that, and they're being successful. And I think when I look at the MENA region, I think that's something that's really lacking, is a regional approach. When you think of Asia, certain things come to mind, industries come to mind. When you think of North America, again, that. When you think of the MENA region, nothing. I don't equate that with any particular sector. I don't think they've done that job. So when people are looking to make those investments, doesn't come up on the radar. So I think, there is that balance of the demand and supply side.
Yeah, and I mean, the regional approach, of course, in the Middle East is very much politicized and
Yes.
impacted by the convoluted politics
Absolutely.
and the perpetuation of violence and conflict. But I want to turn to sort of one of the points that Denise mentioned on, and going back to the idea of, well, it's all about creating the jobs and encouraging entrepreneurship. And you said, Denise, something that struck me as, I think, very important. It's okay if they fail. And I think that's the question I want to ask you, Mara, because you work with a lot of youth and on failure is part of the process. And going back to sort of, the growth mindset versus fixed mindsets in the educational systems, we're not really in the region producing growth mindset youth that would accept failure. So.
Yes, absolutely. So much to say in this regard. I mean, obviously, we all know that resilience is a key essential skill. We call them life skills because we see them relevant for not only work, but for your whole life. And also, we understand that work and careers and learning these days is lifelong. We all need, any of us who have kids know that they're already much faster on using our phones and our devices than we are. So we need to keep up and we need to keep learning and not give up, I tell myself. So I think resilience is a key skill, certainly, that we and many of those of us involved in this essential skills, life skills provision we are thinking about. And I would say that that's also, we like to talk about it also as youth agency, as helping unlock youth agency. And part of our work is helping systems be more youth responsive and be more youth inclusive and help young people and those organizations serving young people unlock youth agency. We think of what young people are capable of doing all around the world, and if they're given the skills and abilities and essentially road to travel, they will do great things. And we've seen that through our Youth Action Net Fellowship, which is a global fellowship supporting social entrepreneurs through an institute in the United States, but also in 24 sister organizations around the world, national institutes that support social entrepreneurship. And we have a very successful program in Jordan called Badr that's produced 89 social entrepreneurs. So it's really important when we talk about entrepreneurship, we're not just talking about it in that traditional economic setting, not to undermine at all how important it is, but also look at social entrepreneurship and even for-profit institutions that are supporting and meeting the needs of young people and other underserved communities. And so in Jordan, we've seen examples. I mean, talk about resilience. We've seen examples, for example, a young woman who had a Badr Fellowship and was just starting out her own self-defense course. Many of you may have heard of her by now because once she got this fellowship, she moved on to Synergos and other fellowships, and now she's quite famous.
Farah?
A different Lina Khalifa.
Oh, okay.
Who started She Fighter, which was the first self-defense course, martial arts inspired for women, at least in Jordan, and then went on now to help women around the world, not only in Mena, develop their own franchise in this area. And now I ran into her in Dubai recently, where she's now was on her way to Germany, where she was educating German women who are engaged in self-defense for how to do this and how to develop franchises in this area. And I think that when we looked at studies actually of our 90 or so social entrepreneurs in Jordan, we interviewed them and did a comprehensive survey. We asked them how they got involved in this, how they decided to start their own business or social venture serving the needs of their community. And many of them said they saw a problem in their community and they felt obliged to fix it. But what they said was they weren't receiving any kind of training or exposure to volunteerism in school. And they said when they wanted to understand what they could do in their society, how they could make it better, they went to international organizations, they went to NGOs, they did not go to their government. And again, if we're gonna be able to meet these expectations of young people, we've seen, we're seeing Libya and Sudan, right now, we're seeing the protest in Jordan. if we don't figure out how we're going to meet these expectations, you know, there will be increased challenges. And so government has to be a part of that. Government, part of the social contract with young people is giving them a reason to believe in their community and their country, and that they have something to offer and they can be heard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we hope that more governments will follow the Moroccan Moroccan model and put this as a priority. I'm going to open it up to questions. We will have some time to answer questions. So I'll start with Kent Hughes, who's our senior chief economist and international trade advisor, and is working with our team on the workforce development project.
Leadership here in the Middle East. I have 3 Arabic words, so I have a lot to learn. Thank you for the panel. This was really terrific. There's a sense not only that a lot's been done, but there's a lot of serious thinking about how to move everything forward. One thing that struck me was something that Andrew said, that you had in the conversation about Morocco and automotive, that there was a system thinking that took place. Sometimes in every bureaucracy you'll find the right hand doesn't know what the left hand or the right foot is doing. And is there a way to encourage that kind of thinking? Scale also is something that came up. Would it be useful, even just as a concept, to go back to the older idea of having a Middle East free trade agreement? There are links with the EU, but just talking about just talking about this kind of thing may change the thinking in the region. The expectations, you think of China's growth, where you had a flood of internal migrants whose expectations were low enough that working 12 hours in a factory sounded like a good idea, or what's happened in Bangladesh, where they survived the end of the multi-fiber agreement. Could you take the reality of what's coming today and certainly tomorrow and show how technology, in fact, is linked to agriculture, is going to be linked to tourism? It helps them think about really the potential impact of artificial intelligence was going to spread through all these sectors. And finally, the ability to introduce this kind of thinking in early life. I see here in the United States and increasingly around the world something called FIRST robotics, and they have this right from the way where kids are problem solving, they're working as a team, things don't work, there is a failure built into it almost always, and then they move on to, so it creates a different kind of expectation for future employment.
Who would like to address that?
Just one quick point. I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that USAID partnered with Volvo in terms of the automotive space for a training program in Morocco. And that particular training program is now extending to sub-Saharan Africa to also introduce training to sub-Saharan African students as well. But on the other questions, I'll let my colleagues.
No, and just, I mean, also, in addition to the work, excellent work USAID has done in this regard, MCC in Morocco, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, is looking at this automotive industry model, which was, at least when I encountered it, was Renault and the government working together to train young people in the automotive sector, integrating life skills into them. MCC is basically building PPPs in growth sectors in Morocco, including tourism, including actually each ministry was able to apply. It was a public sector agency coming in with a private sector agency. And so, for example, we'll be working with the Ministry of Tourism in integrating, continuing to integrate, frankly, life skills across all those Ministry of Tourism training associates, Ministry of Tourism training affiliates in collaboration with private sector partners who need employees in this sector. I think what you said about technology in different sectors is key, and just helping sectors understand how to make the work they do attractive to young people is essential. And just one quick example, a success story. In Jordan, I don't know, many of you probably have been back and forth to Jordan, obviously you have, and Andrew, I'm sure, and you yourself, Denise. If you are in a hotel these days, any of the nicer hotels in Jordan, you will see a transformation in terms of women engaged. So 10 years ago, there were no women working in the restaurants, very few women at the check-in desk, and now when you walk into the Grand Hyatt, where many of us stay, or other places, there are women who are cooking the eggs, there are, and that's across the hotels in Jordan. And that's due in large part to how the sector started to advertise itself and think about itself. But also I have to really say to one of our partners, an innovator in Jordan, which is Luminous Education. And this is just a success story. This is a technical and vocational training center that has now become the go-to place in Jordan, if not the Arab region, to receive demand-aligned training. And what they did is really revolutionary, because they said, first, if we're going to give you demand-aligned training, it has to be accredited. We need the private sector involved in saying that you graduate from here and you're getting welding certification. It is meaningful that the welders of the world, the welding associations of the world, or companies would say, this person knows what they're doing. But they did that across, I don't even know, hundreds of industries. And so now they have a hospitality school that actually, I just went to it a couple weeks ago, that looks like a five-star hotel, and that young people are wearing uniforms and excited to participate in. And then we're honored to be a part of this, because they said every single young person who goes through the school has to have effective life skills. They have to believe in themselves and believe in their own agency and producing a better future for themselves. Every single student who goes through Luminous University and Technical College receives training in life skills and passports to success. And they've said that that's been essential for helping these young people believe they're capable of something different than what they thought.
Thank you. Maya?
For remembering my name. My question is, the comment about misalignment between the
Microphone.
Yes, thank you. So the comment about the misalignment between the skills and expectations and the demand very much resonates. And one of the ideas that percolated that we found, and I'm a board chair for an organization that provides virtual education for refugees and displaced young people in the Middle East, and it resonates also with our beneficiaries, is virtual employment. So could you please share your ideas, what's happening in this field? Because what we found, that many of our students are very skilled, and we can provide them further skills with, for example, computer coding lessons, right? And this could be accredited education. What could it lead to in terms of virtual employment to cross the barriers between the countries, between the war zones?
Thank you.
One of the responses that a friend of mine who is a workforce development expert said is either you get a job or you create a job. And if one is able to work virtually, more likely than not he or she is going to perhaps be self-employed, which I think is absolutely great. If you go out into the tech world, and I'm not a techie, there are a lot of platforms now where individuals actually post what their skills and abilities are, and they are being engaged by folks that are hiring them from all over the world. So I think that's a great way to address either employment, self-employment, or entrepreneurship. One of the challenges that we have seen in the region is really access to the technology itself, the internet. Mobile phones and the capabilities. In some places they're saying they're still on 2G and we're talking about 5G. But I think it's a great way to begin to address employment or entrepreneurship. I definitely encourage it. And one last point, if I may. We talked about failure.
Yes.
It is important that we promote serial entrepreneurship, which in my mind is not failure. It's learning, leveraging, and moving forward.
Yep.
So if one gets an inroad to, as you've said, virtual employment or entrepreneurship, and it doesn't work, that individual or individuals, they have learned what it perhaps will take to do a better job in the next job or as a different type of entrepreneur.
Thank you. And
Yeah, very briefly, yeah, I think the virtual jobs is certainly an area that we're seeing a number of organizations beginning to address, and some, I think, fairly effectively. There's certainly restrictions on accessibility and some, but that also is, I think, greatly improving. And in some populations, like we work with populations in Gaza, that's it. There aren't really many other options. So by default, we're doing a lot of work in training people how to find work in the gig economy. So yeah, I think in short, that's definitely an area to continue to focus on. It's what I'm hearing from our experiences and from others is that it's a fairly big leap. There's a certain level of youth population that can integrate pretty quickly, but once you get through that level, it's to put a fine point on it, it's not cheap.
Yeah, I would agree that one of the challenges I've seen in this, some people call it impact sourcing too, is really getting, like, let's say eBay or Airbnb and who's the great organization out of San Francisco working on this? I forgot their name, but a fantastic organization, basically connecting underserved youth to the data crunching needs of big business. The problem is it's not scalable yet. It just isn't cost effective to get it to scale. But I think some things that would help. Yes, it's an excellent idea but it's just not enough jobs that industry is really thinking of this as a cost-effective, at the same time, development and improved development effort for young people. They see the good in it, but they're not seeing the cost-effectiveness yet. But I think one thing that will help is we're still not there on online credentials. We talk about it a lot. We talk about badging, talk about online credentials, but there isn't a kind of agreed on understanding of showing your worth online. And we're trying to do that in the life skills area. We now have an assessment, a rigorous assessment of life skills, online test, where we're hoping to be able to get to the point where you take the test online of your essential skills, your life skills, and you'll be able to say, I'm life skills certified. I'm work ready, and how if that can catch on or not, or who can certify it or say that this is legit, what kind of businesses will come on board. That's the next step to being able to leverage that and run with it.
Hisham?
Thank you very much. My name is Hisham Jamia. I work at MSI. I think the word scale is mentioned a couple of times, and I have like a little bit follow-on question, if that's okay with everybody. I'm very pleased to when I read the journey for self-reliance and engagement of private sector, because historically there is no way to scale youth program or anything without engaging public sector or the market, because this is where scale could really kick in. And I think talking about scale requires rethinking of project, the concept of project. Because if you think about the project as a project to ignite local system change, is different than you think about project that has a deliverable you need to check the list. It's completely different narrative, different audience. And I think if we embed scale in the design, you have a totally different narrative and question and set of audience. Because if you start with the end game audience, I remember in Egypt when I did some scale for workforce, and I have people from the government, private sector stakeholders, and I just did a very simple math, 100 million, 20 million between the age of 24 to 30, let's say, the worst case scenario, and let's say 20 of them are unemployed. And the program I was looking at to scale is targeting 20,000. When they started to see the number that they came up with themselves, the narrative, the discussion changed. So I think that requires, and that's why I think the USAID policy is critical, require different way to look at partnership, because the two impediment for any scale, looking at this sector for the last 10 years, are two: complexity, not having financial commitment from stakeholders, and complexity in terms of cost effectiveness and capability to deliver on scale. These are the major challenges we notice happening again and again. So I think, again, if we want to look at workforce and scale, we need to rethink our view on the project from the start and embed scale at the design level, because that changed the narrative. Thank you.
Greg, would you wanna, or Denise, do you wanna talk about the design?
I appreciate that, and I agree, but I think we're going to change the narrative even further than that, because with regard to the journey to self-reliance, it's not for USAID to do. It's for the individuals in the respective countries to do. So changing the narrative means we want to engage the private sector to do what it should do to get to scale, to work with the government and others to change how it does business, such that at some point we are no longer in the country. Let me give you an example, if I may. When we talk about firm-level assistance, what we are talking about is how do we assist this firm address its constraints to business so that it grows. So if it's a legal and regulatory issue, then we want to help that particular firm build a capacity to address that issue. USAID should not be addressing the issue. The private sector should be addressing the issue. If it's a trade issue, if it's a technology issue, if it's any other kind of issue, what is it that USAID should be doing to assist that private sector entity across scale to address the issues? Now, that's a different approach, because in the past we have, for the most part, said, okay, government, you need a better banking law, a better labor law, a better whatever law, and we work with the government. No, that is not the way we plan to proceed in our journey to self-reliance. We want the private sector to be at the helm, not the donor community.
That's why we feel like it's so important to be working with chambers and associations. Our model involves supporting local partner organizations in their projects. And if one firm is facing a legal and regulatory barrier, then odds are 100 others in the same are facing the same one. And so having the private sector come together at that level to address those issues. We also have been getting into more and more with chambers and associations on their business services, and again, this has to do with employing collective action for scale, particularly at the small and medium enterprise level. And a really good example of that recently is we've been working with about 11 different small business associations in Jordan, some of them in traditional manufacturing and such, but then others, things like the Green Building Council and some more sort of cutting edge. This was actually part of a Usaid project that FHI was implementing called the Lens Project. And our partners, we developed specific member services guides for each of these associations to help their members in the various challenges that they're facing. And our partners saw 20-some% of the businesses that participated in the program saw an increase in revenue directly. And frankly, for those of us who are in institutional reform, this kind of immediate payback is seldom seen. It's usually long-term. At the same time, we're enhancing the capacity of the associations, and actually through the work that we did there, these groups saw a 400% increase in membership. So businesses are seeing the value in joining these groups and the value of collective action, which we think is also really important in that space. So there's scale, if you will, business scale, but then there's also scale on things like collective action to address some of these common problems that stretch across the sector.
Andrew?
Just, very quickly, completely agree with this focus on engaging the private sector, but a cautionary note that the private sector does have some shortcomings themselves. And one of those is that individuals tend to be very myopic in terms of looking at their own interests for their own businesses or their own sector. And the challenge that was brought up in terms of kind of what is the information that needs to get to training and educational institutions about what skills are needed in the future. Private sector is notoriously horrible at being able to predict that.
Yeah.
And at least with any degree of breadth, that it can be meaningful for education. So there is still, I think, a very important role for probably the government, to be very engaged in collecting and promoting this, because there is a separate interest. And one of the ways that I look at this is that private sectors have a really strong interest in promoting a workforce that's great for them. They want someone who's going to stick with them, who's going to have the skills that are going to be good for them, and that's great. A government has an interest in having a very mobile workforce, one that can easily move and shift from sector to sector to sector. And there are different kinds of skills that are needed for both of those, and both are essential, and there are different interests in delivering and promoting those skills. So there really has to be this kind of
Alignment,
three-way
yeah.
alignment.
I would just add, insert, the government should be promoting a mobile
Yeah.
workforce.
Yes.
Should.
Absolutely, yes.
So we have time for maybe 2 quick questions. So Marina, you had, and sorry. Okay, so Marina.
Thank you. I agree with everything that has been said about the importance of matching skills to the jobs that exist, and the softer skills or the life skills, whatever you want. You have not talked very much about another component of job creation, which is capital investment. You mentioned it very briefly, and it seems to me that one of the biggest success stories you have mentioned, all of you, it's the automotive industry in Morocco that brought in a lot of money from the outside. I mean, after all, it was Renault and Peugeot that put in a lot of money. So that one question is, how much job creation, how much you can solve the problem of job creation and youth unemployment without much higher levels of investment that exist in these countries at this point. Yes, money came out of from under the mattresses or wherever it was stashed away in Egypt. You can also, with the widening of the Suez Canal, you can always argue that was a rather unproductive or at least premature project that siphoned off whatever capital was available.
Siphoned it from mattresses, though, so it's hard to fault them for that. I mean, it wasn't doing anything else.
No, I know, but it's not a good example.
Giving them a good night's sleep.
Could you all talk a little more about the importance of capital investment in this country?
Yeah.
USAID has, if I may.
Can we just hear the second question
Sorry.
for a time?
Uh-huh.
And then please go ahead,
Please.
Halle.
Sorry.
Hi, yes. Holly Jordan from American Near East Refugee Aid. My question is primarily for Denise. You mentioned that the long-term goals for USAID in the MENA region is the pursuit of political, economic, and social stability, and that youth unemployment undermines the stable MENA region. Given the statistics that you gave of the 30% youth unemployment in the region, with Palestine being the highest of the list that you gave at 43%, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the logic of the recent USAID cuts to Palestine, given it seems like this must be the center of where development could do the most good.
Thank
question,
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're in the hot
Good
seat.
luck.
I'll take the easy question first, which is the access to finance question.
But you asked what was on our mind, so thank you.
Thank you.
Keep in mind, I think that the statistics prove the job creation is usually, for the most part, with the small and medium enterprise. And they don't necessarily need the same kind of capital that the larger firms need, et cetera. And there are a growing number of entities that are providing access to finance, as we call it, A2F, to the small and medium enterprise. For example, in USAID alone, in Egypt, an Egyptian American Enterprise Fund is a $300 million fund. And while we do work with larger firms, but the focus is small and medium enterprise. We have a similar fund in Tunisia, and we have 4 what we call MENA II programs, Middle East North Africa Investment Initiatives, that focus primarily on access to finance for small and medium enterprise. As a result of that, for example, in Iraq, there were few, if any, donors or the private sector providing access to finance, and certainly not the banks. We have begun to get more inquiries from other donors around the world, IMF and et cetera, IFC, the Swedes, et cetera, about now that you are doing this, and we see that you actually did it when ISIS was there? How did you manage, and what are the lessons learned? So a large part of what we need to do and talk about, what are the lessons learned in working in fragile states and in the MENA region about access to finance? Personally, I don't think the banks are the answer. They have shown not to be the answer. They have not stepped up to the plate, so we have to look at other innovative, creative ways to provide access to these small and medium enterprises that will create the jobs. Now, with regard to this large elephant, is it Holly? That's above my pay grade.
Nice.
I am going to punt.
Nice. Understood.
You know, the canal project was an extreme example, but it's an example that I like to use because I think well, access to finance is important. I think we need to give some credit to the fact that the resources in many cases are already there. Yeah. The other thing too is, you know, again, to put it in perspective, only 81% of entrepreneurs here in this country do not get bank financing, do not get non-bank financing. They rely on either their own resources or their family's resources or what have you, credit cards in many cases. And in these markets, you don't necessarily have well-established consumer credit markets, right? So there's an issue. SMEs, there's lots of reasons why banks are not necessarily set up for SME lending. In some cases, it's because the government is eating up all the lending. In some cases, it's because you don't have an effective bankruptcy regime, and so the banks would have no recourse to you know, recoup their assets. This was the case in Egypt until very, very recently. I think it's not quite fair to fault the banks for not stepping up. I think in some cases there's constraints that prevent them from doing so, and I think in some cases it's not necessarily the appropriate model. And then at the same time, there's education issues with regard to access to finance. We created a mobile platform in Egypt called Tamwili, and you can sign on as an entrepreneur, you can sign on as a financier, bank, non-bank financiers. And there's a series of filtering that sort of winnows down, if you're an entrepreneur, what's your business all about, that kind of thing, and it sort of filters the financiers according to who might be interested in your enterprise. On the financier side, likewise, what kind of thing are you interested in investing in, right? Because of the expense and complication of sort of data privacy and security and such, the deal has to happen offline, but we make the meeting. And unfortunately, what we found, and you know, this almost seems like blaming the victim, which is not fair, but unfortunately what we found is a lot of the people who signed up didn't follow through on the deal because when they found out what would be required in terms of putting together a business plan and in terms of you know, having their books in shape to, I mean, at some very basic level of corporate governance, they walked away. They didn't want to do that work. Which I think is unfortunate, and I think you know, all of that we've talked about in terms of education factors in here. I think in the MENA region in particular, the essential skills, the life skills, the not at all soft skills are key, because everybody that I talk to, either that's trying to hire or that has gone through the education system, says, I was never taught to think for myself. I was never taught to problem solve. I was taught to memorize and regurgitate what my professors were telling me, and if I couldn't do that, then I wouldn't pass. And that's a fundamental issue there. And so I've walked myself way off of the access to finance issue here, but I think you can see why. I mean, I think there's some fun there. So I won't say that access to finance is not an issue. It definitely is, but it has more to do with, and one of our partners said this a number of years ago, it's not a matter of capital, it's not a matter of resources, it's a matter of deal flow. And deal flow can mean a lot of things, but again, it refers to some of these structural issues that I've been talking about.
Andrew, Mara, do you want to add anything? We have a few minutes. Okay. Well, we ran out of time. I'm sure we can spend some more time talking about this. Very engaging conversation, and thank you so much to our panelists. And thank you all for coming. We will continue the conversation next month with a focus on female labor participation. in the Mena region, as this is one of the major projects that we're housing here at the Wilson Center. So thank you very much. Thanks.